Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today, of course, marks the beginning of the National Women's Safety Summit. You'll recall that this summit was hastily announced in an attempt to stem the tide of outrage coming from Australian women, ignored for 8 years by this government, and finally saying enough is enough. Well, it is going to take more than a summit to restore trust with Australian women. Australian women are tired of being ignored, they're tired of having their concerns belittled, and they are tired of a government that has done too little with its 8 years in power to address the very serious issues which are confronting them. I'm not surprised that women like Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins have expressed some cynicism. Yes, these courageous advocates and survivors are participating in the work that the government is doing now, but they make the point that it comes very late. Today, questions have been raised about whether stories referenced by the Prime Minister in his speech were used with the permission of the women who told them. Now, I imagine that the Prime Minister would have sought their agreement. That would be the ordinary course of things. But if he has not done so, it does suggest that there is a long way to go, that he has much more to learn about how to properly listen to victim survivors and use their knowledge and experience to craft a new pathway for Australians. At the end of the day, what words but action. In just the last week, the Prime Minister has had so many opportunities to provide real and meaningful support for Australian women. Last week, we saw the government vote down amendment after amendment after amendment that would have properly implemented the Your Rights, the Respect at Work report. Kate Jenkins undertook a landmark report. It's a report that was compiled after interviews with many Australian women across many workplaces. It sat languishing on Christian Porter's desk for a year without action. It then languished further, and only now is legislation being introduced into the Parliament. When the Prime Minister said he supported all 55 recommendations, it became very clear in the parliamentary debate that he does not. The Prime Minister also passed up the opportunity to support paid domestic violence leave for women. Labor has for many years supported paid DV leave for women. Leaving violence is expensive and time consuming, and we know that the best way for a woman to get back on her feet, to start the new life that she deserves, is for her to maintain a connection to her workplace. That's why paid DV leave matters, and it's why the Prime Minister should have voted for this important reform last week when he and his ministers had the opportunity to do so. I finally just want to touch on housing. Some months ago, Labor raised concerns that housing was not included on the agenda for the Women's Safety Summit. The government had the opportunity to rectify this omission when they rescheduled the summit. They've chosen not to do so. It is baffling. It is very difficult to understand how anyone who'd been listening to the voices of frontline workers could have overlooked this critical issue. When I travel around the country, it is the number one issue that refugees raise with me. The lack of crisis accommodation, the lack of temporary accommodation, and the lack of long-term housing for women and children escaping violence. Labor has a strong plan to deliver at least 4,000 homes, new social housing for women and children escaping violence. This is a commitment that the government should match.
Thanks, Jenny. Look, thank you, Jenny. Two more points in terms of the summit that's being held in Canberra today, and that is that Aboriginal women are calling for a separate plan. Now, when you think about the depth of the crisis for Aboriginal women and their children in the violence space, you can understand why there's a call for a separate plan, and Labor supports that call. The points that Jenny has made are all extremely important, particularly that point about housing. I wanted to make some comments today in relation to the COVID crisis engulfing West and far western New South Wales, which has now crept in to the Sydney environment. What we saw, sadly, is the death of another First Nations person in Dubbo Base Hospital, a 70-year-old woman from Angonia, which is very close to the Queensland border and very close to Bourke. Angonia is a tiny community and it does not have a hospital, it doesn't have a store, and it certainly doesn't have a doctor. I asked the question last Friday, and if you ask me, it was a thought bubble. The government announced 30 communities that would be some sort of surge capacity for effort in the COVID space in Aboriginal communities. There are more than 30 communities in Australia. And the reason I think it's a thought bubble is the government cannot articulate where these communities are or even what the criteria is for qualifying for this so-called 30 communities. I ask the government to please be transparent when it comes to where those 30 communities are. There is a lot in the media today about vaccine hesitancy. Well, vaccine hesitancy comes in place of no decent communication strategy. Vaccine hesitancy comes because it is filling a void that the government should have filled and thought about several months ago. Can I finish up by just saying that the 30 mobile homes that have been rushed out to Wilcannia, to me, just emphasises the absolute scramble that's going on. If there is an outbreak in another community, do we see the same scramble? And this is a question the government needs to be clear about. We'll take questions now, everyone.
Let's just go Jane first.
Jane, you're first, and it's bloody freezing.
Hello, I was hoping you're okay, so it's quite windy where you are. But we're covering the Women's Summit today, and so I was just wondering if, a lot of experts, advocates, survivors coming together. Is there anything concrete that you hope might come out of the summit?
Yes. Today, from the summit, we would hope that the government would make a commitment to real action. They have had so many opportunities over the last 8 years to do so, and they have missed every one. There are key areas where action now would make a real difference. Investment in housing, a commitment to legislate 10 days paid domestic violence leave, implementation in full of the Respect at Work report. These are opportunities that the government should take up, and they would make a real difference to women's safety now.
The Prime Minister said in his speech today that he believed Australia had a problem, that while Australia had advanced and developed in many ways, that too many women still feel unsafe in Australia. Do you agree with the sentiments of that there is still what he's pointed to quite a serious cultural problem in Australia?
Australia is confronting an epidemic of violence against women, and women are raising their voices and saying they have had enough. We need sustained action at a national level to tackle the scourge of violence. Sadly, that has been lacking over the last 8 years. There has been little urgency, little sense of ambition. Now is the moment when we are looking for real leadership, real political leadership from the Prime Minister. And it will take more than words, it will take action and real commitment to lead a process of change.
Is that all, Jane?
Sorry, one more, but please continue if any other journos there or on the phone.
If you've got one more, did you want to go ahead, Jane?
Oh, yeah, I did want to, sorry. I was just wondering if either for Burney or Jenny McAllister, both have been in public life for a long time. How would you describe the kind of reckoning, I suppose, that Australia
period where Australian women are raising their voices in a way I have not seen in my adult life. And it is an enormous opportunity for our country. We know that if our women are safe, if they are supported in their workplaces, if they are safe at home, we can have a country which is truly equal. And this ought to be our goal, nothing less. Australian women are asking for true equality, and this is an opportunity for the political class to respond. I hope that the Prime Minister means the words that he said this morning. I hope that we have a real opportunity to improve the lives of Australian women.
Sarah?
Yeah, just on the second death of an Aboriginal person from COVID-19, we've seen 2 deaths now in the community. Do you think the government strategy is going on regional Australia with the surge in cases?
The question about rollout in Aboriginal communities, particularly in regional Australia, is a real question. I do not think there is demonstrated capacity to meet what is an emerging crisis in regional Australia. The death of the woman from Angonia is symptomatic of what's going on out there in the regions. I mean, I've been to Angonia. It is a long way away and it has no resources, and I have been calling for days now for a demonstrated evacuation plan and asking the question about capacity of hospitals. There cannot be a mad scramble every time there's an outbreak in regional Australia. If that's the approach, then we are going to see more tragedy.